golden sun of Egypt was suddenly eclipsed by the terrifying arrival of the Hyksos, who tore through the ancient borders. Honestly, nobody expected these nomadic invaders to possess the advanced technology of the chariot, which completely overwhelmed the local Egyptian infantry. The peaceful villagers along the Nile watched in absolute horror as their sacred lands were transformed into a chaotic battlefield. To be fair, the Hyksos did not just come to trade. They came to rule with an iron fist and heavy taxes. The fire of the northern cities burned bright into the night, signaling the end of an era of true Egyptian sovereignty. It is heartbreaking to imagine the temples being looted and the ancient statues of the gods being disrespected by these strangers. The invaders established their capital at Avaris, turning it into a fortress that seemed impossible for any human army to conquer. History tells us that the once unified kingdom was fractured into pieces, leaving the southern princes in Thebes feeling completely isolated. The silence that followed the invasion was heavier than any storm, as the people waited for a miracle to save them. Can a nation truly survive when its heart has been ripped out and replaced by the cold spirit of an oppressor? The great river Nile once wept in silence, as its children were forced to bow before foreign and very cruel kings. Honestly, the division between the north and the south created a wound that bled the wealth and spirit of the people. The southern kingdom of Thebes was trapped between the Hyksos in the north and the powerful kingdom of Kush. To be fair, the people were tired of paying tribute to kings who did not even speak their ancient and sacred language. The ancient traditions were slowly fading away as the influence of the Hyksos culture began to seep into the local life. Every night, the elders whispered stories of the old days when Egypt was a single, powerful light in a dark world. The military was weak, poorly equipped, and lacked the morale needed to face the terrifying speed of the foreign chariot teams. Hunger and uncertainty became the daily companions of a population that had once known the luxury of peace and great abundance. The gods themselves seemed to have turned their faces away from the suffering of the people who built their great monuments. Is it possible for a culture to completely disappear if it loses its land, but manages to keep its ancient memories? A young boy stood on the balcony of Thebes, watching his father and brother go to a war they never finished. Honestly, the weight of a dying kingdom fell onto the small shoulders of Ahmose after the tragic deaths of his family. His mother, Queen Ahmose, was the true strength behind the throne, protecting him while he learned the art of war. To be fair, he was not just a prince. He was the last hope for a civilization that was on the brink. The air in Thebes changed as the young king grew, filled with a new and quiet energy that smelled like coming rain. He spent his nights studying the tactics of the enemy, realizing that he had to learn their ways to finally defeat them. His training was brutal and relentless, as he knew that the Hyksos would show no mercy to a king who failed. The people looked at him and saw the reflection of the sun, believing that perhaps the gods had finally sent a savior. He gathered the smartest minds and the bravest hearts, forming a small circle of loyalty that would eventually change the world. How much pressure can a single human heart take before it either breaks into pieces or turns into a hard diamond? Behind the closed doors of the Theban palace, a deadly game of shadows was being played by the young, ambitious king. Honestly, the strategy involved sending secret messengers, disguised as simple merchants, through the dangerous paths of the northern marshes. These brave individuals carried vital information carved on small pieces of pottery that were hidden inside grain sacks. To be fair, Ahmose was not just building an army. He was building a network of spies within the enemy's capital. The blacksmiths worked through the night, forging new weapons that were designed to match the strength of the Hyksos, foreign bronze. Ahmose studied the movement of the stars and the seasons to ensure his first strike would be perfectly timed and unexpected. The resistance was a quiet fire that burned in the hearts of every Egyptian who dreamed of seeing their land free. He knew that a direct attack would be suicide, so he planned a series of clever distractions to confuse the enemy. Every gold coin and every bag of wheat was carefully saved to fund the massive operation that was about to begin. Can a revolution born in the dark ever truly find its way into the light of the sun without being crushed? The water of the Nile Delta turned a deep, dark red as the first wave of ships finally arrived for battle. Honestly, the clash between the Egyptian infantry and the Hyksos chariots was a symphony of bronze, blood, and desperate human screams. Ahmose led from the front, his blue crown shining like a beacon of hope amidst the terrifying fog of war. To be fair, the Hyksos were surprised by the new tactics and the sheer ferocity of an army that had nothing left. The sound of the war trumpets echoed through the marshes, signaling that the centuries of foreign occupation were coming to an end. Arrows rained down from the sky like a deadly summer storm, piercing the leather armor of the invaders who once felt invincible. The mud of the delta became a trap for the heavy chariots, allowing the light-footed Egyptian soldiers to gain a massive advantage. Ahmose showed no hesitation as he pushed his troops forward, knowing that this was the only chance they would ever have. The walls of Avaris began to crumble under the constant pressure of the siege engines that the Egyptians had cleverly constructed. Does the ground remember the names of the thousands who fell so that a single king could claim his rightful throne? The once mighty walls of Avaris finally fell, and the invaders were forced to flee back into the harsh, unforgiving desert. Honestly, Ahmose did not stop at the border. He chased the retreating enemy deep into the lands of ancient Palestine. The siege of Sharuhan lasted for 3 long years, proving that the king would never rest until the threat was gone. To be fair, this was a systematic removal of every trace of foreign influence that had poisoned the land for generations. The king's justice was swift and final, ensuring that no foreign power would ever dare to look at Egypt with greed again. As the last of the Hyksos disappeared into the eastern horizon, a strange and beautiful silence finally settled over the Nile. The return of the army to Thebes was a celebration unlike anything the ancient world had ever seen or even imagined. Ahmose carried the spoils of war not for personal wealth, but to restore the glory of the temples he deeply loved. The revenge of the king was not just about violence. It was about the total restoration of his people's dignity and pride. Is revenge truly sweet when it is bought with the price of a youth spent in the middle of a war? The two lands were finally stitched back together by the iron will and the brilliant political mind of King Ahmose. Honestly, the unification process required more than just military strength. It needed a new and very complex system of government. He appointed loyal governors who were dedicated to the idea of a single, powerful, and completely united Egyptian nation. To be fair, the economy began to thrive as trade routes to the south, and the east were finally reopened and protected. The borders were fortified with a series of massive towers that looked out over the desert like the eyes of Horus. Ahmose made sure that the laws were applied equally to everyone, from the rich nobles to the humble farmers in the fields. The sense of national identity was reborn, and people started calling themselves the children of the sun, once again with pride. Gold flowed back into the royal treasury, but this time it was used to fund the most ambitious building projects ever. The king traveled the length of the river to see the progress with his own eyes and to hear the people. Can a land that was once so broken ever truly forget the cracks that once threatened to swallow it whole? The sound of hammers and chisels replaced the sound of swords as the king began to rebuild the broken temples. Honestly, the reconstruction of the Temple of Amun at Karnak was a statement that the gods had returned to stay. You know, Ahmose ordered the most beautiful white limestone to be brought from the quarries of Chira to decorate the sacred walls. To be fair, he wanted to show the world that Egypt was not just surviving, but was more beautiful than ever before. New cities were founded in the Delta, turning the former war zones into centers of learning, art, and vibrant human culture. The irrigation systems were repaired, ensuring that the Nile's flood would bring life back to the lands that had been abandoned. Ahmose also honored his mother and his wife by building them magnificent monuments that celebrated their vital roles in the liberation. The scent of incense once again filled the air of the sanctuaries, creating a bridge between the people and the divine. Artisans from all over the country gathered to create jewelry and furniture that would set the style for the next millennium. How can stone and paint capture the spirit of a man who changed the course of human history forever? The army that Ahmose built became the foundation for the most powerful military machine the world had ever seen until then. Honestly, he integrated the chariot so perfectly into the Egyptian way of war that it became their most iconic and deadly weapon. You know, he established a professional class of soldiers who spent their entire lives training for the protection of the Pharaoh. To be fair, the tactics he developed would be studied by great generals like Thutmose III and Ramses the Great for centuries. Egypt was no longer a country that just defended itself. It was now a power that influenced the entire Mediterranean region. The navy was expanded to protect the coastlines, making the Nile the safest and most profitable highway in the ancient world. Military training schools were opened, where young men from all classes could rise to high rank through talent and bravery. Ahmose understood that peace is only possible when you are strong enough to make your enemies fear the thought of war. The equipment of the soldiers was standardized, creating a sense of unity and discipline that was completely new to the Egyptians. Can a weapon built for war ever truly be used to guarantee a lasting and meaningful peace for the future? The death of Ahmose did not mark an end, but the glorious beginning of the famous and powerful 18th dynasty. Honestly, every pharaoh who came after him looked back to his reign as the golden standard of what a king should be. You know, the stability he created allowed for the incredible achievements of leaders like Hatshepsut and the famous Amenhotep III. To be fair, the world would be a very different place if Ahmose had failed in those dark days of his youth. His name was whispered in prayers for centuries, and he was eventually worshipped as a minor god of the Theban region. The culture he saved went on to influence the Greeks, the Romans, and eventually the modern world that we live in today. The story of the boy king who chased away the giants became a legend that inspired every child in the Nile Valley. He taught the world that no occupation is permanent and that the spirit of a people can never be truly broken. The legacy of Ahmose is written in the stone of the temples and in the very DNA of the Egyptian people. Are we brave enough today to face our own invaders with the same courage that this young king once showed? From my ship in the stars, I see that time is just a circle where the oppressed always find their fire. Honestly, humans are fascinating because they can build the most beautiful things only to see them destroyed and then build again. You know, Ahmose was just a biological entity, yet his will was stronger than the magnetic pull of a small dying star. To be fair, the story of Egypt is a lesson for the entire galaxy about the power of patience and strategic thinking. I have traveled through many dimensions, but the courage of a young king facing impossible odds always makes me pause and wonder. The concept of a homeland is something that even we, the travelers of Technomag, find deeply moving and very beautiful. When you look at the stars tonight, remember that the same light guided Ahmose as he fought for his people's freedom. Power is not about the weapons you hold, but about the purpose that drives you to stand up when everyone else sits. History is not just a list of dates. It is a living vibration that connects every soul across the vast ocean of time. If a boy from 3,500 years ago could save a civilization, what is stopping you from conquering the small shadows in your life? You know, if you love these journeys through time, please subscribe and hit the bell to join our growing cosmic community. Honestly, hitting that like button and sharing this story helps me reach more humans who are curious about their own incredible history. To be fair, the best way to keep these legends alive is by sharing this video with your friends and family today.